So that is a new orientation that came after the 80s, that companies became more and more interested in branding. And for a couple of years ago, me and one of the scholars at Lund University, we decided to develop an index in order to capture how brand-oriented companies are and if there is a relationship between brand orientation and profitability. And also what factors that distinguish companies that are really brand-oriented. So we did a study on the 500 largest Swedish companies. And as you see here, there's a lot of international brands represented in the study. So these results are not limited to the Swedish markets. And we actually done a similar study in Netherlands with the 500 largest companies in Netherlands as well, with similar results. So I wouldn't be surprised if we got the same results here in Brazil as well. And the index contains a lot of different questions that we asked the CEOs, the chief marketing officers, and the chief communication officers. And they have to answer a lot of questions around the branding in their companies. But the index model is about 3 questions. And that is, do you see brands as an important asset in your company? And second, do you use the brand to develop competitive advantages? And 3, do you have the brand as a starting point, as a strategic starting point for all the decisions in your companies? And there you see how the companies answered. That it's easier to think, oh, this is an important asset, but to really use it as a starting point, we have a far lesser companies that really have that. So it's easier to have an attitude than to really work with it. Okay, and then this index, it is from 0 to 100, and the average for all companies were 67. And then we could define 4 different approaches to branding that work with branding in a totally different way. And we call these groups leaders, educators, salesmen, and skeptics. And if we skip the index value and instead look at the profitability in this group, here we have plotted out their EBITDA, that is their operating profit. You can see that the leaders, the companies that are very brand-oriented, they are almost as double the profitability as the skeptics. So it's a very, very strong relationship between being brand-oriented and having a very, very high profitability. Actually, the average difference between being a leader and a skeptic, it's $100 million per year in operating profit. So there you have my 100 million reasons for branding. Okay, but let's have a look at these 4 groups. What distinguish them from each other? And here you see on the axis here, you have the low and high external focus. And on this axis, you have the high or low internal focus. And that is what distinguishes these companies from each other. And if we start with the salesmen that are good at the external focus, they're very skilled at traditional brand management. And they are very, very focused on product branding, but not on corporate branding. So they use the Procter & Gamble model, or the GM model, where you have one brand for every segment. But the corporate brand doesn't really stand for something, and the consumer don't know about the corporate brand at all. So in these companies, they are skilled at traditional product branding, and branding is a marketing department issue. It's the marketing department who owns the branding issues, and other departments, they are not really into branding. Okay, but their opposite we find in the educators that use the brand to create a strong corporate culture. They work according to the assumption that if you take care of the inside will take care of the outside. So if the salesman was the traditional American way of building brands, you can see that the educator, that is the Japanese way of building brands. You know, Japanese companies that focus very, very much on the corporate brand and the corporate culture. Actually, at Japanese companies, they meet on the morning and they hold each other's hands and they sing the corporate song. Do you have any corporate songs here in Brazil? Okay, that will be the next stage for Brazilian brands. Okay, Then we have the leaders, and they use the brand as the hub of the whole operation. So they combine both an internal and an external focus. And the brand, it's the cement that binds together both strategy, organization, and operational development. So the management in these companies, they make no real difference between brand development and business development. That is the same thing in these companies. So they are really, really dedicated and work very, very hard with these issues. And they are best on all factors that we saw in the study. The leaders, they are in a class of their own. But it's also very interesting to see that in this group, we find all types of company. It's not only B2C company. We find an equal representation of B2B companies. And there is also an equal representation of goods producing and service producing companies. So brand orientation, it isn't just something for B2C companies. It's also very much for service producing B2B companies as well. Okay, last we have the skeptics group. And they have a brand, but it's just a logo in these companies. They are not really focusing on branding at all. Of course, there can be some enthusiasts that really, really likes branding and are working with a branding project, but that is just a project. That is, they have a clear start and a clear end. So when they are ready with the branding project, they can file it away. Oh, we are ready with the branding. Now we can take another issue in the company. So if this enthusiast changed position within the company or left the company, there is also a very, very high risk that the brand position will change. So they have a very tactic approach to branding in these companies. Okay, but let's have a look at the factors that really distinguish the leader groups, the most brand-oriented and the most profitable companies. These are the 8 factors that our study showed really distinguish the leader groups from the others. And the first factor is approach, and that captures the company's attitude to branding. And that means, for example, do they see brand advertising as an investment or is it a cost? Do they see branding as an integral part of the business model? And do they regard branding as a core competence that they got to have inside the company and they cannot outsource to brand consultants or advertising agencies? And a good example of a really, really brand-oriented company is, of course, Nike. And they even define themselves as, we are no longer a product company, we are a brand company. And if you see how they are working today, they have actually outsourced their manufacturing and they are focusing on building a brand. So at Nike, marketing communication is not viewed as a cost, it's an investment. And brand building is, of course, a natural part of the business model and definitely a core competence that they got to have inside the company.